Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to have you all here with me today. We're going to talk about mindful acceptance. You can see the title here says, It's Okay to Not Be Okay During a Worldwide Pandemic. This is part two of a two-part series that I've done. The first series we did on mindfulness. Again, this is going to focus on acceptance. And I really just want to open this up by asking a question. Now, right now is an extraordinary and difficult time for many, presenting different stressors and challenges. So we're going to talk about sometimes when we're stressed out, we engage in behaviors that aren't the healthiest at an attempt to avoid dealing with some of the stressors, but also thinking about the stressors and thinking and feeling the different emotions that we could be feeling. So I'm going to open up with a poll just to get things kicked off. In this poll, it's just going to ask, over the last week or so, have you primed, wined, or dined, or engaged in any other behavior to avoid certain unpleasant emotions and thoughts? So I will launch that right now. You'll have about 30 seconds to answer. So obviously, many of us like to order on Prime. Have you been doing a lot more ordering and buying lately? Dining, have you been snacking to sort of deal with this? We know that alcohol sales have gone up quite a bit in this country. So have you been drinking more wine than you normally would, or other things? And sometimes engaging in other behaviors to intentionally avoid unpleasant thoughts and emotions could be something as simple as, are you working more than you used to in an attempt to avoid? Are you baking? Or have you taken up a new hobby? Now, taking up a new hobby and doing all those things, it can be really helpful. But when we try to avoid thoughts and emotions and we try to focus on something else instead, it can actually be kind of costly. So take about 10 more seconds to, if you have not yet filled in your answer for the poll, and then we're going to move forward. Okay. And I'm going to close out the poll right now. So it looks like 71% of you said that you have engaged in some activity to intentionally avoid unpleasant thoughts or emotions. Sometimes we also unintentionally or subconsciously engage in different behaviors as a result of maybe some of the stressors in our lives. So that could be you, it may not. You might be in a position right now where you are completely handling stressors fine and you feel good and you're calm. You may not be in that place right now. And I just want to take a moment to recognize if you're angry, you're overwhelmed, you're scared, you're frustrated, any of the emotions, it's completely okay to not be okay right now. I know that there's a lot of well-intentioned people out there saying, you know, during this time, you can create a new hobby. You can learn something new. Well, the something new that I think will benefit us most to learn is how to practice and use mindful acceptance. And that's exactly what we're going to get into today. So here's what we're going to go through. The benefits of acceptance. So what do we know through the research? The definition of acceptance. What does it mean? Does it mean just to accept some of the negative situations? We'll kind of break that down. But specific factors that we're going to focus on within acceptance are non-judgmental awareness. And I have a fun game for you guys to play to actually highlight that. And then approaching versus avoiding our emotions and thoughts. And then the last thing we'll get to is when and how to practice acceptance. So the practical application of how you're going to apply this to your life when you leave here today. And then we'll have 30 minutes at the very end, 15 minutes at the very end to be able to do a Q&A session. I will try my best to answer any questions that you might have. So moving forward, what are the benefits? What do we know through the research? Well, there's a lot of different benefits to practicing acceptance. So first of all, from a mental well-being standpoint, it reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety and less stressor-related rumination. So if you don't know what rumination is, it's having something on your mind and you just keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it and mulling over it over and over again. So when we practice acceptance, it actually keeps us from ruminating and less negative emotion. And we're going to talk about how we can accept our negative emotions, but how that frees us up to experience less negative emotions by accepting them. Then we know that there are physiological health benefits as well. So lower blood pressure, reduce levels of cortisol. And part of that goes with when we are stressed, we need a good coping mechanism. Otherwise, we turn to these avoidant behaviors that can become really maladaptive and unhealthy. So if we have a mechanism to deal with stress proactively, it's going to reduce the effects of stress on our physiology and then reduce systolic blood pressure. We also know that acceptance opens us up to resilient coping. So we have reduced amygdala response. So I talked about this in the last session, how when we're feeling stressed, we go have that stress response. We might do fight, flight, or freeze, right? And many of us are just reacting right now because of the situation that we're in. So what happens when you get into the stress mode is that your amygdala sounds off the alarm to get that stress response going, but it also shuts down something called the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that helps you to make solid, wise decisions and to regulate your emotions. Okay, so it shuts that down. But when we practice acceptance, we have greater access to the prefrontal cortex, even when we're facing stressors. Also, it enhances our ability to take intentional, values-based action. So in moments of stress, what do you want to stand for? Who do you want to be known as? Do you want to lash out into your old behaviors or lash out on your children or spouse or coworkers because of the stress you're feeling? Or do you want to handle those moments with intention and purpose, being your best self? So acceptance is going to help you to do all of this. Now, what is acceptance? How do we define it? So just pay attention to this definition here. It's approaching with a sense of curiosity and acknowledging inner experiences. So it's not about acknowledging necessarily the stuff going on outside of us, but it's really being able to approach with curiosity and acknowledge thoughts and emotions, particularly unpleasant thoughts and emotions, without reacting to them or judging them to be good or bad. Now, don't worry if you're kind of like, I have no idea what she's saying here. I'm actually going to break all of this down for you because there's two primary aspects of acceptance that we're going to talk about today. The first is non-judgmental awareness. And like I said, I promise I have a fun game to actually help you out to understand that. The other part is being able to approach your emotions and thoughts instead of avoiding those. And I'm going to break down the science on that and why it's really important to be able to approach versus avoid. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine you're a doorman at a hotel. Say it's a really fancy hotel. And I want you to pay attention to your thoughts as you watch each guest enter the lobby. So what I'm going to do is in the next few slides, show you different guests who are coming into your lobby. And you're just going to notice and be aware of what your thoughts are as soon as you see those guests. Ready? Okay, guest one. What are your thoughts? Guest two. Again, you're just noticing your thoughts and that's it. Here's guest three. Now we have guest four. Just notice whatever thoughts come to mind. Guest five. What are you thinking when you see this guest? And guests 6 and 7. So a whole bunch of different guests just came into the lobby and you noticed the thoughts that you had. Now here's my question to you, and I'm going to open up a poll again. Did you judge any of the guests entering the hotel? In other words, did you form an opinion or conclusion about them, whether it was a good opinion or a bad opinion? And it could be any of the guests. It doesn't have to be all of them. So I want you to answer very honestly. Give me a second and I'm going to open up the next poll. Okay, you got about 30 seconds to answer. Did you judge or form any opinion, kind or unkind, about any of the hotel guests? Take about 10 more seconds if you haven't answered yet. This is completely anonymous. Sorry, tongue-tied today. We've got about 17 people who answered, a few who haven't. Okay, in 5 seconds, I'm going to close down the poll. And here are the results. So 94% of people said that they developed some sort of opinion about one of the guests. There's one person who probably already practices mindful and acceptance, I'm guessing, who did not have any opinions about any of the guests. Now, obviously, what I did was I included some photos to make you have an opinion or to try to force you to have some sort of opinion. This is what happens within our brains, right? So when we see novel information, we tend to form a conclusion maybe based on past experiences. And it could be a kind opinion or an unkind opinion. That is very common. That's something that our brain does. And I see we have someone in the chat box here. Okay. So I'm the person who did not judge, who's very aware is somebody I know, Dr. Tithi Bagnagar. Thank you so much. Yes, so people who practice acceptance, they tend to be more non-judgmental. So why does that actually matter, right? We're going to get to that in a moment, but I'm going to play another quick game with you, okay? So all I'm going to do is I'm going to list different emotions. You're just going to evaluate to yourself whether you think that emotion is good or bad, okay? So I'm going to list one emotion, then just evaluate, do I think that's a good emotion or a bad emotion, okay? So the first emotion is fear, good or bad. Happiness, good or bad? Anger, would you say good or bad for anger? How about joy, good or bad? Sadness, would you say it's a good or bad emotion? Gratitude, good or bad? And remember, you're not overthinking it, you're just going with your gut response. Okay, so I'm not going to pull you on this one, but here's what we typically do. We will label emotions that are more negatively balanced as bad, such as fear, anxiety, anger. That is what society kind of teaches us to do. And we'll label emotions such as happiness and joy and gratitude and hope as good emotions. But here's where this can be problematic. We tend to start judging ourselves and trying to avoid those emotions when we label them to be bad. So giving you an example, quick example of judgmental awareness, because that's exactly what we just kind of practice with the hotel lobby. Yes, judgmental awareness, what that actually looks like. Non-judgmental awareness is really bringing awareness to your inner experiences, so your thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and outer experiences without judging them to be good or bad. Now, here's something that can happen, and I'm going to give you a real life example. It's a little embarrassing, but I love being vulnerable. This is what I used to do. So about a year and a half ago, I started to feel anxious on takeoff on airplanes. I've been to 60 different countries, traveled on airplanes a lot for work, and this is just something that came up. I'm a resilience trainer by trade, so I teach people how to handle stress. So when I would start to feel anxiety on takeoff, instead of just noticing without judgment, I'm anxious right now, I would do this to myself. I'd say, I shouldn't be feeling anxious. I know better. I know how to control this. I'm a resilience trainer. This is so embarrassing. And so when I started actually judging the emotion of anxiety that I was feeling, I had all these other thoughts. And guess what? Those thoughts were driving other emotions. I started to feel angry at myself. I started to feel embarrassed. I started to feel ashamed. And so here's what happens is when we exercise judgmental awareness on our thoughts and emotions, we create more emotions and thoughts that can actually be harmful, as opposed to just noticing, all right, in this moment, I'm feeling anxious. And we're going to talk about the science behind that in a bit. But again, this is all about awareness without judgment. Can I just acknowledge something and be aware of it without having to say that's a good thing or a bad thing? And I want you to think in your relationships too. You do this a lot with people with their opinions that might be different than yours. You might go, well, that's a bad opinion, or that doesn't work out. Or, hey, yeah, I really agree with that person. We tend to make judgments all the time because, like I said, it's the way our brain works. But we can train our brain to operate differently. So here, when we judge something or label it to be bad, we tend to avoid, okay? So we try to avoid anger, we try to avoid sadness, we try to avoid guilt, we try to avoid shame. Now, I did give you a trick question as to whether particular emotions were good or bad. Here's the thing about emotions that I like to tell people. All emotions can be helpful because they provide us with information and they can enable us to actually take productive action. But often what happens is we either feel angry and act out in a way that is unproductive and counter to our own values, or we get stuck in certain emotions. We'll get stuck in anger, we'll get stuck in sadness without a way to actually get out of those emotions and handle them in a very productive manner. So when we label something as bad, we try to avoid. But here with acceptance, instead of avoiding thoughts and emotions that can be unpleasant, it can be much healthier to just approach them without judgment. Okay, so that's part of it. But here's the other thing: avoidance comes at a cost. Now, there are times when in the moment you might need to avoid some of the thoughts and emotions that you're having. There are other strategies that actually enable you to recognize that our thoughts directly influence our emotions and physical reactions. So we can actually change the way we perceive something or think about it to change or control our emotions and physical reactions. There's a time and place for that. There's also a time and place for mindfulness, which allows you to disengage your attention from one thing and re-engage and focus on another thing. And that can be helpful too, particularly in times of performance. But there are times when we try to avoid, and it's actually really unhealthy and costly. Here's what the research shows. Avoidance is linked to a greater likelihood of anxiety and depression, poor work performance, lower quality of life, a greater likelihood. So the more that we try to avoid, the more we're going to probably ruminate over something and like think it over and mull it over and over and over again. And that can interfere with our sleep. And also it's linked to problematic behaviors and poor coping mechanisms such as substance abuse. So again, this comes at a high cost. So a time to use some of the other strategies is when you know they're going to enable you to actually be productive in the way that you respond to the stressor. If they're not going to enable you to be productive, you need to use acceptance. And I'll cover more times later in a few minutes of when it is a good time and appropriate time to actually use acceptance. But here's what I want to try out, okay? Let's just see what your brain does. So everyone sees there's a vintage yellow Volkswagen Beetle. I happen to love Volkswagen Beetles. I'm a huge fan. So that's why I chose this particular graphic. But I want you just to visualize a vintage bright yellow Volkswagen Beetle for a moment. Okay, now that you visualize that, if you need to close your eyes, that's completely fine. But what I want you to do is for the next minute, do not think about a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. You can think about anything else, but do not think about a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. Okay, that minute starts right now. I'm going to time you, and I'll let you know when the time is up. And I see someone just joined us, so you can actually read on the screen exactly what we're doing. Again, remember, you can think about anything else in the entire world. But you know what you're not supposed to be thinking about, right? Okay, about 15 more seconds. Again, think about anything else you want besides you know what. All right, and time. Now you can think about a yellow beetle as much as you want. So again, I'm not going to pull you on this one, but here's what traditionally happens. When we try to avoid thinking about something, we often start obsessing. So some of you probably were successful in not thinking about the vintage Volkswagen Beetle. Some of you probably had an image of it pop into your mind at least once. Others could not stop thinking about a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. So we know this concept of avoidance is not a successful strategy, particularly long term. So I want you to think about this for a second. Have you ever broken up with somebody and you're trying to avoid seeing them, you're trying to avoid thinking about them because it's really painful, right? When we go through breakups with people who are meaningful to us. But then all you can do is like obsess over them. You stalk them on social media. Maybe you don't stalk them, but you just can't stop thinking about them. The same thing is if you've ever tried to quit smoking and you're trying to avoid thinking about a cigarette, you start obsessing. Or say you go on a diet. I love chocolate cake. So you go on a diet and you're trying not to think about your favorite sweet snack, and all you do is think about it, right? So we know this through research, the more we try to avoid, the more we actually start to think about it and maybe ruminate on some of these unpleasant inner experiences. So we know it completely does not work. Now, when specifically do you want to practice acceptance? So I'm going to talk about that, and then next I'm going to talk about how can you practice it. Okay, so a couple of things here. When emotions and or thoughts keep resurfacing despite trying to avoid them. So you're trying to avoid them, you're trying to ignore this emotion of anger or this emotion of sadness that you're having, or specific thoughts that are really unpleasant that you're like, wow, I shouldn't be having these thoughts. You're trying to suppress them and they just keep coming back. That is a really good indicator that it is time to practice acceptance. You need to approach and acknowledge those thoughts and emotions. How about when you're judging yourself for feeling a certain emotion? Have you ever done that where you're like, wow, I'm feeling really sad right now. I shouldn't be feeling sad. Or I'm so angry at my friend for canceling plans on me, but I shouldn't feel angry. We do this a lot. We don't just experience our emotions, but we start having thoughts and other emotions related to our thoughts and emotions. And it gets really complex, as I mentioned before. So when you notice that you're judging yourself, to kind of stop and say, and be able to label, all right, right now I'm feeling anxious. And that's it. It's very objective. You're just noticing what you're feeling. You are not putting the judgment there. You're not making yourself feel bad. Same thing with certain thoughts that you might have. We have to understand thoughts and emotions, they're really important, and the emotions are really important information that can help guide us and direct behavior, so as long with our thoughts as well. But that's just activity of our mind. Just because we have thoughts doesn't make them true. It does not mean we have to react to them. Same with emotions. Just because I'm angry doesn't mean I have to respond or react in anger. I can actually just notice I'm angry and choose something different, choose to respond wisely instead. Another time to use acceptance is when you're repeatedly engaging in harmful coping behaviors. As I said, alcohol sales have gone up. I think the statistic was more than 60% in the country. There are a lot of people who are drinking right now as a mechanism to cope. Sometimes it's out of boredom. But if we really think about it, most of us try to just avoid engaging with our emotions and thoughts that are challenging, and we try to instead distract ourselves and make ourselves feel more pleasant, try to fix ourselves with things that really aren't helpful, that can become problematic. So if this has happened once, that you're engaging in a behavior and you're like, wow, okay, so I was trying to avoid there and I was doing this and that wasn't really the best choice, or I went on a spending spree this one day, fine. But if you notice that there's a pattern developing for you and you're doing this more regularly over the course of a week, it is time for you to practice acceptance. Now, another time to practice acceptance is if you experience stress-related health issues. Guys, I've been training resilience with populations around the globe for over 10 years now. And some of the skills I train, they do teach you just to change what you're focusing on, okay, mindfulness, or to change maybe your thoughts so you can change your emotions. And when you get so good at doing that, it is easy to start avoiding. So here's some things that would happen to me. I've had some really strange health issues come up. They were all stress related. I had no idea at the time. I had to go to the doctor and be like, I don't understand. I never get hives. I have hives, right? So this has happened to me before. And I went to the doctor and they're like, well, how do you feel emotionally? And I'm like, I feel good. And they're like, okay, so is there any big changes happening in your life? And I'm like, yeah, I'm about to move across the country away from my family. And it was like, bingo, of course, that is a big change in my life. And instead of being able to acknowledge I was sad to leave my family and not be able to see them physically as much as I would like, not spend time with my parents, that there were unknowns about how often I would get back to visit them, instead of actually allowing myself to think through that and feel sad or feel a little anxious about moving to Colorado to be with my now husband, I was completely avoiding it, but I was so unaware that I was avoiding it. And mind you, I've also been training mindfulness for a long time. but you can get into suppressing emotions and thoughts, and also repressing emotions and thoughts. And the repressing is really where it's more subconscious. You don't even realize you're doing it. So again, these are specific times you can actually use this particular skill as opposed to other skills you might be using during other stressful times. And it's also good during high stress times. Right now, if you are perceiving all these different situations arising from the pandemic to be really stressful and you're feeling overwhelmed, it is a good time to sit down and practice acceptance. There are different ways to do it, but I'm going to give you one specific 4-step process to actually be able to practice this. What I would advise you to do right now is take a screenshot of these steps, or take a picture on your phone. That way you have it there in front of you. But you can use acceptance to act with intention. So it's an acronym, it makes it real easy. But the first part is just acknowledging and accepting thoughts and emotions with a sense of curiosity and non-judgmentally. So when I start to feel stuff going on and my emotions are kind of leading the show, I might say, okay, right now I am really angry. And I just label it. And I don't judge myself for feeling angry. I just acknowledge I'm angry right now. And I do say these things to myself. Or right now I feel scared. Or right now I'm sad. I've got this situation where my parents were supposed to come out and visit me in Colorado at the end of May. And it's been 5 years since I've been here. I was super excited for that. Of course I feel sad. But if I try to avoid acknowledging and accepting that emotion, it's only going to result in something unproductive. So that's the first step. The second step is to consider what you can control. So what can I control in this situation that I'm feeling sad about? I can control actually engaging with my parents on a more regular basis through Zoom. So I can actually feel connected even though we're physically apart right now. Okay. The other thing is I can always control how I respond. Okay. So what can I control? Maybe I can't control part of the situation or any part of it, but mindfulness and acceptance actually opens us up to having greater control and seeing where we have control. The next part is take several deep belly breaths. Okay, so normally we breathe and we expand with our chest. So if you just put your hand on your stomach, your left hand on your stomach, your right hand right here on your chest, breathe in and let your stomach expand. A really deep breath. Just practice that for a second. That's what I mean by diaphragmatic breathing. When we engage in doing diaphragmatic breathing, it actually calms our emotions down. And it helps us to be able to refocus and take purposeful action. So the last part is really taking intentional values-based action. What can you do? How can you respond in a way that's going to allow your best self to shine in that moment or in that situation? So this is the simple 4-step process. When you're feeling overwhelmed or when you're trying to avoid, instead use acceptance to act with intention. And this is all rooted in something called acceptance and commitment therapy, the different steps and theories and research that is backing this up right now. So again, something really simple. Take 5 more seconds. If you did not get a chance to actually take a photograph of this, go ahead and do that right now. The last thing I want to share with you is just a few resources. So I'm going to talk about a few of these resources and then we'll get into the Q&A session. So some websites, mindful.org, I mentioned that one last time. It's still a fantastic website to go through. It talks all about mindfulness, which is really about paying attention on purpose in the present in a non-judgmental way. And it also talks about acceptance and being able to cultivate acceptance in different practices. I gave you one 4-step process, but there are other practices too. And as a quick one, sometimes what I do, instead of going through the full 4-step process, sometimes if I know I have a lot of different thoughts and emotions, but I haven't spent time or given myself permission to actually explore those, I just open up some form of paper or just a computer, Word doc, and I will let out every thought and every emotion. I don't even stop. I just kind of rapid fire write it down. And as soon as I'm done, I close it out and I walk away from it. And that actually opens me up to feel better and to kind of let it go. Instead of pushing it away or holding on to it, I can just kind of acknowledge it, accept it, and let it be for what it is. So actmindfully.com.au. That's also Russ Harris. He does a lot of work within acceptance. So that's also a good website that you can look at. Somebody last time asked about particular things within yoga. So there's yogatrail.com, and there's yogajournal.com, and then the last one is doyogawithme.com, which is actually has videos with specific poses. So if you're into yoga as a way of developing mindfulness, there are specific websites that you can go to actually build that practice up for you. So again, like I said, I don't know if that person's online right now. Hopefully they are to get those resources, but I promised them I would. So let's move into our Q&A session. So you'll notice there's a Q&A box. You are welcome to send questions anonymously, or if you want to include your name, that's okay too. I do not have to read it aloud, but I'm going to take about the next 15 minutes and I will sit here with you and answer the questions that you have to the best of my ability. Take a minute or two to just think through what questions might I be having? What am I confused about? What do I need more clarity on? And it looks like we've got our first question. Any tips on distinguishing between avoiding behaviors versus taking needed breaks? Yes. Okay. So let me just talk about some specific things that we do to avoid, like behaviors and strategies. So sometimes, like I said before, we use substances such as drinking. We might get into different drugs. Sometimes we will watch TV. Like, I don't want to think about this, so I'm just going to engage in a TV program right now, and we overdo it. So one thing is, are you engaging in this behavior more than you would have before the pandemic? And is it driving any guilt? Is it feeling unhealthy to you? When you're taking needed breaks or engaging in a new habit, because there are some people who are there taking this time right now to build new habits, maybe to learn new languages, to learn how to play the guitar or some other instrument, to read things that they don't get a chance. If it's a healthy behavior and you've also taken time to maybe process through thoughts and emotions that are challenging, good. But if you specifically are realizing that I'm engaging in unhealthy behaviors on a regular basis and I'm not allowing myself to feel, then that's a red flag for it is time to kind of hit the pause on those behaviors. And sometimes we do. We kind of volunteer, we engage in work-related tasks, we engage in things like baking to specifically try to avoid. Now, like I said, it can also be subconscious. But because we're talking about it, you have the opportunity right now to just kind of explore and say, all right, what emotions or thoughts am I having related to different stressors that are going on for me specifically? You know, there's a pandemic, obviously, but there are different stressors that might be coming out as a result of that pandemic, or we might be perceiving those stressors differently. But just really sitting down and asking yourself and exploring that. And if you find, you know what, I really do feel good right now, and the practices I'm engaging in to take healthy breaks, they really are helping me out and my well-being is high, fantastic. If you're finding it's otherwise for you, then like I said, time to engage in this process of acceptance. Great question. Hopefully that was an answer that helped. What other questions do I have? And really, please don't be afraid to ask anything. I may not have an answer, but I can always get resources too. And if there are no more questions, that's completely okay as well. There's absolutely no pressure. And as one of my favorite colleagues like to say, if you had a question, what would it be? I'll give about one more minute if there's anything out there that you want to say. Should you learn to accept unconscious thoughts to get rid of them? I think that one's really challenging because they're unconscious, right? So we're not even aware. So sometimes I think the practice of just asking yourself, what thoughts have been arising for me lately? Or what could I be thinking about this situation that's kind of stressful for me or frustrating or provoking anger? So if you notice you're experiencing emotions, but you're not aware of the thoughts, sit down and write out the thoughts that correlate with the specific emotions. And that can help. And then you just don't judge yourself at all for the thoughts you're having. We're going to have a lot of different thoughts right now. And I think it's highly valid. And I think what we tend to do, as particularly within my field of positive psychology, I'm a huge advocate of hope and optimism. Positive emotions in and of themselves, they do fuel resilience. The science is strong on that. However, you also have strength in recognizing certain negatively balanced emotions and acknowledging them. Again, the whole thing is about let's not get stuck in anger. Let's not get stuck in grief. Let's not get stuck in sadness. Now, grief is a whole nother topic we could talk about, and it does take longer to walk through that process, but not getting stuck there forever is kind of the point. I just can't stop feeling sad for some reason, and sometimes I don't know what to do. It's just a wiser feeling. I can't control it. Weird feeling. Okay, sorry. I can't control it. I am normally a very positive person. I think something that we're doing a lot of right now, and like I said, I'm going to kind of posture back to, there's a lot of stuff on social media saying you should come out of this with new stuff done, your house clean, a new habit. This is a time to be grateful for the things you do have. And those are very well intentioned and sometimes great strategies. But I think it also leaves some of us feeling guilty and ashamed and sad because it looks like the rest of the world is doing just fine during this pandemic. I'm telling you guys, I've talked to so many people, that's not true. And there's not enough people saying, if you're not feeling okay, that's okay not to feel okay right now. It's an extraordinary time. It would be okay, even on regular times, to not feel okay because we are human. We go through the vast human experience of different emotions, and that is absolutely normal. Now, this person's saying they're feeling sad for some reason. I can't tell you the specific reason, but you can always ask yourself, is there something specific going on that I'm sad about? As just a little sidebar on this, a lot of us are actually feeling grief right now. And we label it as sadness, but we're grieving things that we've lost. Now, some people have lost opportunities and they're completely okay with that, but some of us really aren't. And that's okay to just grieve. There's different things that I had, like I said, this trip with my parents, I was really looking forward to. It was going to be a highlight of my year, but I am grieving that loss and I'm allowing myself to feel sad and to, kind of just be in that. Now, I'm not constantly, consistently sad, but when it comes up and I'm reminded, in a week from now, they would have been here. Here's what we would have done. That stuff comes up. I allow myself to experience that emotion, to experience those thoughts, but then I move forward. So what I would say is try to recognize, maybe, has there been something, an opportunity or an experience that you've lost? You could be sad because you're not connecting with people in the same way. For some people, even if you're in a crowded household right now, you can still feel isolated. For some of you who are living alone, you can feel isolated. So just kind of recognizing what could be dredging up this feeling. And the other thing, like I said, practice acceptance. That is a good strategy, but there are other strategies that can help you too. So cultivating gratitude might be helpful to say, all right, I practiced acceptance first, but now I've moved forward. And now I'm going to kind of focus on what are some of the good things I still have going on? What are the good opportunities? What are new good opportunities that I have as a result of this? And if you're not finding anything, what I want you to go out and do is create good stuff within your life. Create a very small action step that you can take that's actually going to make you feel good and that's going to be healthy for you. And that can help to pull you out of it. But I'm glad that you're aware of where you're at emotionally, and just know that's okay that you're sad. Guys, if you're frustrated, if you're angry, that's all okay. But let's work to accept and not get stuck so we can be more intentional in the way that we're responding instead of just wildly reacting or even freezing and not knowing what to do. Hopefully that was a helpful response. Do I have any other questions at all? I have somebody else wrote a comment in the chat. My struggle is at night. Everything makes sense during the day, but in the middle of the night, my mind can't seem to reason. Tips for that. Can we obtain a printout of your presentation to remind ourselves to not judge ourselves? I struggle with that too. Absolutely. So You could have opted in. I don't normally send out emails to anybody that outlet participants of this nature, but if you opted in to share your email with me, what I'll do for all of you is I'll send out a copy, a PDF file of the slide deck, and also a handout on how to practice the 4-step process. So I'll do that a little bit later today, but let's just talk about this for a second. My struggles at night, everything makes sense during the day, but in the middle of the night, my mind can't seem to reason. Here's the thing, we're facing a lot of unknowns right now. It is really hard to logic your way out of the fear of unknowns. I talked about mindfulness in the last session and really talked about paying attention to the present instead of maybe worrying about the future. Often when we kind of wake up in the middle of the night or we can't fall asleep, it's because we're feeling anxious about something that's going to come down the pipe, whether that's in a day or in a week or in a few months. So you can practice mindfulness and you can practice acceptance to actually be able to regulate those emotions or just deal with those emotions in a healthier way that will help to facilitate sleep. The other thing that I would say to you is if you haven't watched session 1 of It's Okay to Not Be Okay, go back and watch that. But if you can just do a simple breath meditation before bed or when you wake up out of sleep, that can actually help to facilitate sleep. So one of the results of avoidance can actually be insomnia. So remember I said that it can manifest in physical ways when we start to avoid and we have the stress, but we're not acknowledging the emotions or stressors that we're, facing right now. It can result in all these different things. So that's some of my tips for that. You don't have to logic your way out of everything right now and try to force yourself to understand things. Sometimes we can't understand what's going on, and it's just better to kind of accept some of these things and find out, where do I have control and where can I be intentional in responding, or how can I intentionally respond? I get it now. You can grieve other things, not just losing someone. Absolutely. Some people are experiencing loss of loved ones, which is absolutely tragic right now. Almost all of us are experiencing loss of something. I have a niece who's supposed to graduate college. She's graduating in 3 years this Saturday. She doesn't have a ceremony now. And it's, her parents, she's an only child. And so that opportunity for all of them has been lost. And I would suspect that there's probably some sadness around that and grieving. And sometimes we just mislabel what it actually is. Not being able to spend a birthday with your child. Yes, and children too. You guys have to recognize children are going through all of this. They're recognizing like this isn't normal, and even though there are things people are doing as far as like a whole parade for birthday parties, it's still not the same as it was. And we're being shaken by what we used to have as our foundation for normalcy into something that is abnormal and unknown territory right now. And that can be hard to actually navigate. Or take a trip that you planned. Told you guys I'm a traveler at heart, absolutely. I don't know when I'm gonna get to travel outside of Colorado anytime soon, but yeah, any of those things we could be grieving and being sad about in this moment. Is there anything else that you guys have a question about? And I just wanna say, I thank you guys so much for being vulnerable and just upfront about how you're feeling and vulnerable and asking these questions. I'm sure you're not the only person online right now who's asking them. I'm sure a lot of us are having these same questions of, what do I do with this? Why do I feel sad when I'm normally upbeat? How is this normal for me? And just have compassion for yourself. That's the biggest thing I can tell you. Be patient with yourself, have compassion, but use the tools that we've talked about to actually be able to move forward and be purposeful in your life. However you are feeling right now, whether you feel calm or at peace, or you're angry or frustrated or overwhelmed, it's completely normal. And there are so many of us who are engaging in behaviors to try to avoid dealing with some of these emotions or even acknowledging them. We try to avoid them, right? So just remember, it's okay to feel those emotions. It's okay to have some of the thoughts you're having. Lean in, explore with a sense of curiosity, acknowledge the thoughts and emotions that are uncomfortable, and learn how to accept those so you can actually be more purposeful and intentional and get unstuck from some of the inner chaos that could be there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. It's been a pleasure.